was. But so Oscar Wilde once quipped, "Experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes." I'd like to begin this morning by focusing on my own experience and on some of my more memorable mistakes. At first, I thought it would be a little bit hard conjuring up enough significant mistakes to be able to speak about, but the more I thought about it, the more they kept pouring out. I'll share a few of them today with you. They're little vignettes. Now, I needed a way of classifying them, so I turned to my beloved companion Webster's 7th New Collegiate Dictionary. Mistake, a wrong action or statement proceeding from faulty judgment, inadequate knowledge, or inattention. So let's start with inadequate knowledge. The first vignette was when I was about 8. We're riding home with Mom from my sister's ballet lessons, making small talk. "Nichols just got a new Dodge," Mom commented. "It's an Oldsmobile," I said. "No, it's not, Nettie. I'm sure it's a Dodge." "No, I'm positive it's an Oldsmobile." "Want to put some money on it?" Mom asked. "What do you mean?" "If you're so sure, we could make a bet." "Okay," I said with unwavering confidence. "I'll bet you $5 the Nichols just got a new Oldsmobile." Now keep in mind, this is in 1955. I mean, $5 is like an astronomical amount of money. "$5? She asked in disbelief. $5, I repeated, utterly sure that I was now richer by $5. When we got home, I'm not sure who made the call to the Nichols, but I remember the answer: "We just bought a new Dodge." I went upstairs to my room and cried. And I think I cried again when I turned the $5 over to my mom. How we suffer when we make avoidable mistakes based on inadequate knowledge, and how firmly we resolve next time not to wager so much on what we think we know. The next vignette is the year 1966. I'm 19. I've attended the American Institute of Architects convention in Portland, Oregon on the city. It's been sponsored by the church, my participation, because the secular city has just been published. I was asked to preach a sermon on my experience, so I took extensive notes and spent days organizing them. The big day arrived. I entered the pulpit with my manuscript and proceeded to preach for over 45 minutes. In the receiving line, most of the adult members were polite and gracious. But as the high school choir director shook my hand, he slipped a piece of paper into it, and when I was alone, I looked at the paper. "Don't tell us everything you know all at once. Sometimes less is more." I was grateful to all those who had listened so attentively when they were bored to tears, but most of all to Dick Barber, who reminded me that the human attention span is indeed limited, even to take in pearls of great wisdom. How we suffer when we make avoidable mistakes based on inadequate knowledge, and how firmly we resolve next time to ask ourselves if this is one of those occasions when less is more. So how about mistakes due to faulty judgment? There's sometimes a fine line between inadequate knowledge and faulty judgment. But as I cast my eye over my lurid past, I did notice some instances in which I should have known better. The grilled cheese sandwich incident may be on the cusp of these two, but definitely shows poor judgment. I was 7, maybe. It could have been older, heaven forbid. I gave myself the benefit of the doubt in this occasion. I was home after school and hungry for a snack. I opened the refrigerator. A bread and sliced American cheese caught my eye. Boy, would a grilled cheese sandwich taste good right now. I took the bread and cheese out of the fridge and, without thinking it through carefully, placed the cheese on top of the 2 slices of bread and popped them into our very typical 2-slice toaster. I knew something was wrong when nasty smoke started drifting up. Something was very wrong when the cycle ended and nothing popped up at all. I made a split-second decision to go upstairs and hide under my bed. As I feared, Dad was not pleased. Spent the better part of Saturday dismantling and cleaning charred cheese out of the heating elements. I don't remember what my punishment was, but it couldn't have been worse than the torture of those minutes waiting for Father's wrath. How we suffer when we make avoidable mistakes based on faulty judgment, and how firmly we resolve next time to think things through before we act. My next big mistake occurred at Summit UU Fellowship on Sunday, April 28, 2002. It was a memorable day for being a day of a congregational meeting and a men's chorus concert, and I was singing with the men's chorus, and the great piano incident. I was preoccupied as I helped with setup and feeling out of sorts and impatient, as we are sometimes as we set up the room. In rolling the piano into place, not asking anyone for help, of course, one of the wheels caught on the carpet. The piano tipped over and landed on my right shoe with my foot inside. Ouch. Needless to say, I begged off the Simple Gifts dance routine for the evening chorus performance. How we suffer when we make avoidable mistakes based on faulty judgment at age 7 or 55, and how firmly we resolve next time to ask for help when we need it. Or how about mistakes due to the third item, which is inattention? Theologians have long spoken of sins of commission and sins of omission, what we do and what we leave undone. Mistakes fall into these 2 categories as well. Our third category of mistake are as often mistakes of omission as of commission, mistakes due to our inattention. I've had a lifelong tendency toward inattention in an arena that I'm still wrestling with. I suspect I'm not alone with this community of dedicated volunteers. This involves trying too hard to please others. The roots, I think, are in my genes. In relationship with my family of origin, my early religious understandings taught that love is the highest virtue, that loving service to others is our highest calling, that loving our neighbor is the main event in life. Conveniently forgot Jesus taught us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Never quite trusted that self-love thing, especially since church also taught us that pride was the chief sin. From the vantage point of many decades, I can look at a host of life decisions in the context of trying too hard to please others, too often at my own expense. This is a hard mistake to correct. You get used to doing this, and so does everybody else. One discipline that can help is to ask yourself, am I acting from fear of criticism or disapproval from others, or from love? If it's not love, choose a different action or a different motivation. How we suffer when we make avoidable mistakes based on inattention to our deepest selves, and how firmly we resolve next time to muster the courage to show ourselves the same love we're so eager to extend to others. And then there are, of course, mistakes we make because of all 3. The biggest mistakes involve inadequate knowledge, faulty judgment, and inattention. That certainly applies to me and my staying in the closet so long as a gay man, only emerging fully in my 40s. I didn't know myself as well as I could have, and I didn't trust what I knew of other people who loved me. I projected judgment and condemnation where there was plenty of understanding and support. and I didn't pay sufficient attention to the acute discomfort of trying to lead a life with two distinct and separate identities. How we suffer when we make avoidable mistakes based on inadequate knowledge, faulty judgment, and inattention. And how firmly we resolve next time to be bolder in our trust and our risk-taking for truth. Of course, personal mistakes aren't the only ones that we're concerned about. As I've grown older and more aware of the history of the culture in which I've grown up, my focus has shifted from the personal to the collective. I want to conclude my thoughts today with reflections on mistakes that we've made collectively and lift up two for your consideration this morning. The first is the idea and practice of racism, used to justify slavery, a hugely consequential mistake initiated on this continent in 1619 when the English privateer ship White Lion landed at Port Comfort in today's Virginia with 20 to 30 enslaved Africans. Thus began the widespread practice of primarily white people exploiting black people's labor without just compensation or humane treatment. This continued in its harshest forms in parts of the country for nearly 250 years, and perpetuated under Jim Crow laws and practices the racist norms and conventions that have persisted to the present day. It's resulted in the development of a poor underclass of people, denied the opportunity to accumulate wealth, denied equal treatment under the law, denied full personhood, ensured blatant inequity and the continuing social instability that comes from people growing weary of continually having to endure injustice. Racism is a national mistake of epic proportions based on all three of our definitional factors: inadequate knowledge of the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, and of the history of our denial of that truth; faulty judgment about what it means to champion equal protection and equal rights under the law of our democracy; and inattention to the inner contradictions between our founding principles and practices and the customs and laws that blatantly violate those principles and have done so for over 300 years. How we suffer when we persist in denying our nation's legacy of racist beliefs and unjust laws, meticulously documented in books such as The New Jim Crow and Caste, and how urgently we are called as people of conscience to disavow white supremacy and dismantle racism in all of its manifestations in our country. And finally, a second collective mistake, the consequences of which we will be wrestling with for decades to come, ignoring warnings about global climate change over the past 5 decades, pretending that scientists' warnings about how we are rendering our planet unlivable are unreliable or exaggerated or misguided, that we needn't take any collective action to change our exploitation and use of fossil fuels, that our own economic prosperity surely justifies any and all practices, even in the face of growing reports of ecological catastrophe, first in remote glacier fields and South Sea atolls, then along our own coasts or in our forests and floodplains. How we suffer when we refuse to admit the truth about how we are harming our planet and threatening a livable future for our children and grandchildren under the 7th generation. How much more pain and suffering we will have to endure because of our intentional blindness. It is inevitable that we make mistakes on a personal level. It's a bond that we all share with one another. We are creatures who make mistakes and know it. So what are we to do about our mistakes? Suffer them, make stories out of them, cautionary tales such as I've done today, honor them, learn from them, know that we will make others before we're through. As Nancy Schaffer reminded us in today's reading, because we are imperfect and love so deeply, we will never have enough days. We need the gift of starting over, beginning again, just this constant good, this saving hope. She invites us to risk trusting that the universe, life, source of compassion, the nature of things, God, choose the language that works for you, will give us a chance to start over and carry on. And that we will find within ourselves the courage and the support and the trust to seize that chance over and over again. It's also inevitable that we will make mistakes on a collective level, sometimes huge ones. The magnitude and dire consequences of these mistakes bring us up short. They may be collective mistakes from which there is no starting over. As we know from the news and from films like Oppenheimer, we have the power to make planet Earth virtually uninhabitable for human beings. We have yet to develop the humility to admit our mistakes and the insight to try to correct them, to chart a different course for our shared future. So we find ourselves in a time of lamentation and grieving for the possible catastrophic future that may lie ahead for us if we don't wake up and make some changes. My brother Barry entered a Methodist Youth Fellowship competition in high school and offered a speech where he quoted Alexander Pope. To err is human, to forgive divine. Not failure, but low aim is crime. It is human to make mistakes. It is also human to forgive others and ourselves. And even more important is our calling individually and collectively to aim high, to take risks, to live out of a deeper self-awareness and mindfulness, to admit our mistakes and to start anew. May this society embolden and empower you to think big and to risk making mistakes, to hold you when you fail and when you forgive, to invite you to accept forgiveness, to go on loving yourselves, to move on and to join with others in acknowledging collective mistakes and chart a new course to a better future. We are creatures who make mistakes, but we are not creatures made by mistake. Experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. Oscar Wilde is right. That's what it means to be human. Everybody makes mistakes, but mistakes are not the last word. What a relief. What a challenge. What a blessing. So may it always be shalom, blessed be inshallah, aho, shanti, amen. Looks like in the order of service we have Q&A, is that right? Do I stand here and watch the tomatoes come toward me?
There's someone over there who's going to look at the screen. We use the Zoom people first.
Zoom people first. Excellent.
We can talk to you later.
Hello, Zoom people.
So let me just say, so if anyone has a question on Zoom, okay, Ginger, please unmute.
I'm afraid I don't have a question, but I have a comment, if that's okay.
Fine by me, absolutely.
Can you hear me? I would like to comment on your honesty, your transparency, the beauty of your presentation, and how you masterfully use yourself as the center of this whole talk, with giving us, a sense of compassion and empathy, if we are capable of those. And I really want to thank you for what you have just said.
Thank you very much, Ginger.
Rich has his hand up.
Rich, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so I want to thank you, as well as Ginger did, But I do have a question. It's a practical one. Based on your comments on racism, do you feel we're finished with affirmative action type programs? Or do you feel there's much more work to do, and what would you recommend?
I think addressing the problems with racism in this country is going to take generations. I can't imagine any of that being finished, certainly not going to be finished anywhere close to my lifetime, or I think even the lifetime of the youngest people in our community. I don't know exactly what the appropriate legislative remedies are. And to some extent, I'm not sure that legislation is where change needs to happen. I think that we're really looking for an increase in public humility and acknowledgement of our history. I think that's one of the things that's so alarming about efforts to suppress history in our educational systems. You know, those who don't know their history are condemned to repeat it. And it seems to me a highly regrettable set of actions based on fear, and in my view, an unjustified fear that knowledge is somehow corrupting and dangerous for society. I think actually the ethical humanists would totally agree with me that that knowledge should be widely embraced and dispersed as widely as possible. So I don't think the legislation is going to be the pathway. I think we need a sort of social change of heart.
Thank you.
Speak loud, and maybe we could.
Testing 1, 2.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. The question is, forgive sounds good, but forgetting, I'm not sure I could do that, or many other people can do that. So what do you say about forgive the person, but it's always in back of one's mind?
Yeah, I don't think that forgiveness requires forgetting. I think they're two very, very different things. And in the same way I was just talking about knowing our history, I think to forgive our forebears is not to forget that they what they have done. It's interesting. I was ordained at King's Chapel in Boston, which is a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and they were recently going through a process where they were a church established in 1686. That's when slavery was still practiced in New England. So they have found some 219 people in the history of their congregation who were enslaved. And the slave owners were some of the major donors to the church. So they're in the process of coming up with a way of honoring their history and repenting for their history, but by no means ever forgetting their history. So I think it's important for us to recognize that forgiveness does not mean forgetfulness, but making a decision that we will not let the past bind us moving into our own futures. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Adam. Thank you very much for your talk. I had a question about mistakes and two different sorts of mistakes. What we might with Pope say, like a mistaken aim versus the mistaken execution of a good aim. You know, so the person who makes a mistake in making their grilled cheese, we might say this is forgivable, as opposed to an action that on reflection, the motivation was cruelty or frustration, where you might say, well, that seemed like a mistake, and someone might reply, that was no mistake. I intended, this act of, cruelty or unfairness. And I wondered from a pastoral standpoint or from a, advisory standpoint, how you approach that difference, when you encounter someone who, part of what you feel called to do is, I feel like what you may have done was in fact a mistake, though you may not yet see it that way.
Mistakes that are intentional acts of cruelty or malice or, yeah. Well, that's kind of the question of theodicy, of how is the world put together and how do we deal with evil? Because you don't have to look very far in our world today to see some pretty blatant manifestations of misanthropic behavior and meanness and evil. I think that we need to call. Accountability is all about calling people to account for what they do, and we may never know exactly what people's motives are, but we can pretty well tell that some people's motives are pretty base. I think it's partly we should never abandon believing that we need to hold people to a higher standard of behavior with one another, and call out evil when we see it. I'm not saying that that mistakes are kind of, they're inevitable, but I don't think we should ever settle and accept them as the human reality without challenging people to do better and to be more ethical.
One more.
Hello.
Hello.
All right. So you talk about yeah. You talk about how forgiveness is an important part of acknowledging the mistakes that we make ourselves and that other people make that affect us and those we love. If we're supposed to forgive and not forget, if we should be trying to push people to be more ethical, how does forgiveness look different than empathizing with people who make mistakes? And is there an action that comes with forgiveness necessarily that doesn't come with empathizing?
Well, I guess empathizing is an important human capacity to enable you to realize that your perspective isn't the only one in the universe, and that we, being an interconnected species of people, what we do affects one another, and we're connected. We're connected to one another, and to be able to empathize with someone is to be able to step outside your own perspective a little bit, to see the world through somebody else's eyes. Forgiveness, I think, is forgiveness at its most difficult involves the experience when we have experienced hurt and we have experienced someone violating what we think is our human dignity, and the capacity to let go of, forgiveness has sometimes been described as the capacity to let go of wanting there to be a different future from what, or a different past from what we have experienced. It's letting go of the implications of that hurt, and in order that we ourselves can travel lighter. I think forgiveness has much more to do with ourselves than it has to do with the person forgiven. There's a whole different sermon on forgiveness. We could tackle that another day. Thank you. Thank you very much.